So my spiritual reading this morning comes from something that Philip Gulley wrote, which was a short article entitled Cultures of Crucifixion. He said this: "The crucifixion and resurrection were and remain revelations of our character. The crucifixion tells us that Caesar used his power to kill and destroy. We all know people like Caesar. They conscript the popularity of religion and the power of government, using them to knock down others and build themselves up. They don't care who they hurt, who they malign, who they wound. They care only about their own power, their own prestige, their own position. If you cross them, if you question them, if you challenge them, watch out. They will use their power to destroy you. They are Caesars in the business of crucifixion. As Quakers," he is a good Quaker pastor, I would say Christians, "as Christians, our calling in life is twofold: not to be a Caesar, and to, with every fiber of our moral being, stand against Caesar."
The reading this morning is from Matthew chapter 28, verses 1 through 7.
I can get closer. Yeah.
After the Sabbath, as the first day of the week was dawning, Mary of Magdala came with Mary to inspect the tomb. Suddenly, there was a severe earthquake, and an angel of God descended from heaven, rolled back the stone, and sat on it. The angel's appearance was like lightning, with garments white as snow. The guards shook with fear and fell down as though they were dead. Then the angel spoke, addressing the women. "Don't be afraid. I know you are looking for Jesus, the crucified, who is no longer here. Jesus has been raised, exactly as it was foretold. Come and see the burial place. Then go quickly and tell the disciples that Jesus has risen from the dead and now goes ahead of you to Galilee. You will see Jesus there. That is the message I have for you."
Would you pray with me? Divine presence, as we ponder today the concept of resurrection, the concept of new life, be with us, fill us, guide us, nurture us. Help us to see and to know the Spirit in our lives. And may we all be filled with light and life as we ponder and meditate and speak and share this morning. Amen. But for the last 5 weeks, I've been talking about resistance, a spiritual and a social resistance against the Caesars of the world of Jesus' time and the Caesars today. You know, Jesus worked so hard to lift people up spiritually, to help them know a God that loved them, to help them know that they didn't deserve to be oppressed, to help set them on a path of grace and of beauty and of light. And in the midst of doing that, he spoke up and stood up again and again against the powers that wanted to squash people. And what did he get for it? Crucifixion. It's probably the one thing that we know with absolute certainty about Jesus. Absolute historical certainty. The one thing that we know was that he was crucified, executed for insurrection. But today, we still have services like this. Today, we still have his stories. We still have his teachings. We still have the light of his Spirit because something happened after the crucifixion. Right? And it's a mysterious, weird, ineffable kind of thing that's always hard as a pastor to talk about. I know some pastors are really good at just saying, Jesus was resuscitated, right? Never been in my, makes no sense to me. And it didn't make any sense to Paul either. The Apostle Paul said, what happened with Jesus was ineffable. It wasn't a physical body, it was a spiritual body. The experience the disciples had and other people had of Jesus after his death was a spiritual experience. And it was an experience that brought them life, an experience that brought them close to God. And my guess is that every single one of you have had that kind of Easter experience. Some little or big experience of God, which is why you're sitting here. Because if you don't have that spiritual experience that you want to dig deeper into, or you want to honor, or you want to celebrate, you don't sit here on Sunday mornings. And certainly not on Easter maybe somebody dragged you here, and I'm sorry, you have to listen to me anyways. But I think we all, and regardless of what you believe and what you don't believe, I think those spiritual experiences exist for all of us, whatever your religion or non-religion. The divine works in the world in this ineffable way that lifts us up. And at that time, it touched those disciples so strongly that they were compelled. And this is the most amazing part of the story for me. The most compelling part of the story for me was that they were compelled to not just give up, not to just go sit in a corner and grieve, although they probably did that for a while. But eventually, they did the work of resurrection. Despite the crucifixion, despite the risks, they continued to be people of resurrection and of new life. Philip Gully, in that reading I just did for you, the spiritual reading, talks about how crucifixion and resurrection are revelations of our character. I find that fascinating, the revelations of our character. So it makes us think, what does it look like, and I'm actually asking you this question, what does it look like if we have a character of crucifixion? What might that look like? To me, they're almost archetypes. Do you know what an archetype is? An archetype is sort of a pattern of behavior, a pattern of being, a pattern. It's like in every movie you ever see, there's a protagonist and an antagonist, right? You've got a hero or a heroine, or you have the jester, or you have the doubter, or you have the teacher, the mentor. All of those are archetypes, right? They're characteristics and almost roles that you find in different cultures all over the world, regardless of whether they were ever connected or not. A mother and a father are archetypes. So in this case, to have a person of crucifixion and a person of resurrection are almost archetypal characters. So what might it look like? And Mike's right with me. What is it?
So we're teaching the kids about, character versus society, character versus self.
Mm-hmm.
So that to me is like the archetype.
Archetype. Sure.
So Jesus versus society, Jesus versus himself, Jesus versus,
Okay, good. So if we use crucifixion as an archetype, what does it look like?
From a simple standpoint?
From just, what would it look like if I had a character of crucifixion?
Death.
What would you see in me?
Death to life.
Death to life. What else? What does that look like?
Courage.
Greediness. There's one. If I'm Caesar, right? Let's put it that way.
Good versus evil.
Good versus evil. So in this case, crucifixion is kind of evil, right? So if I have that mentality, a crucifixion, it's a revelation of my character that I have a crucifixion, which I don't. Okay, so let's be clear. Although we all may have a little bit of it. Occasionally I feel that way. But what else might it look like?
Intolerance.
Intolerance.
Retribution.
Retribution. violence, meanness, fear, causing fear, not having fear, ignorance, apathy, brutality,
Misuse of power.
a misuse of power, ignorance. Yeah, see, now you're getting it. All of those things are a revelation, are a characteristic, can be a characteristic of crucifixion, right? A crucifixion character. So if you have a resurrection character, what does that look like?
Open-minded.
Open-minded,
Transcendent.
a leader. Well, you can be a crucifixion leader too. Look at Hitler.
All right, a positive leader.
A positive leader. Okay, Mike.
Transcendent.
Transcendent.
Overcoming.
Overcoming. Devil. Hopeful.
Courageous.
Courageous.
Accepting of all.
Accepting of everyone.
Generous.
Generous.
Respectful.
Respectful. Kind.
Empathy.
Empathy.
Compassionate.
Compassionate.
Self-sacrificing.
Self-sacrificing. Good. You did that all really well. Sorry if I made that hard somewhere in there. That was not my intent. So, Jesus is clearly, right, the revelation of his character is that of a resurrection character, right? Set against the Caesars of the world that had crucifixion characters. And not only just Caesar, but the higher-ups in religion and the higher-ups in the government who were squashing people and crushing the life out of them in any one of a number of ways. Right? So if we're to follow Jesus, then the goal is for us to have a resurrection character. The goal is for us not to be Caesar, not to have the characteristics of a Caesar, but to have the characteristics of a resurrection person. Right? So, while Caesar tried to cut down and malign and destroy and diminish and marginalize people, especially through that crucifixion of Jesus. It is, it's demeaning, absolutely. The response of God, and the reason we have Easter is the response of God is to say that God is going to bring new life despite that person and that behavior. Right? And I'm not necessarily saying that, everybody's going to be raised from the dead. This is not what this is about. This is about the metaphorical dying that we each experience in our lives over and over again. The metaphorical crucifixions that happen in our lives. And those powers, those forces within us and within others that bring us back. That bring us hope again. That help us to want to go on and give us the courage to go on. We'd all like it a whole lot if God were the type of God that just came down and smote all the bad people, right? It's in the Old Testament. Why doesn't this happen? And maybe some of you have experienced this, but in my humble experience, that is not the behavior of God that I have ever seen. The behavior of God is to look at us and say, you have resurrection character in you. Use it. Use it against the Caesars of the world. Use it to bring the people in your life back to life, to give them hope. And use it through redemptive love. Because if there was a message of Jesus, it was redemptive love. What is redemptive love, you say? Redemptive love is all about healing. It's all about wholeness. It's all about forgiveness. It's about connection. It's about bridging gaps. It's about loving people even when they're talking loud out in the hall when you're trying to preach. That's redemptive love. Because they're people too. And how wonderful. And may they have a nice day. Redemptive love was the message of Jesus that brings us life that is transformative and transcendent, as Mike said. The power of resurrection is not that God's going to do something for us. The power of resurrection is in us to live in our lives, to do for others. Does that make sense? And it's hard because, okay, I'm going to grant you that this is not a black and white conversation. This is not, this side of the room are all crucifixion characters and this side of the room are all resurrection. It doesn't divide like that, right? We all have moments when we're kind and we're generous and we're feeling just really good and positive and we're ready to go out and conquer the world and do all kinds of great things. And then we have those moments where we're like, I am all out of nice.
Oh, yeah.
And just don't get in my way right now, because it's not going to be pretty. We have those moments, like when Jordan comes and he's like all tired from work and he's like, no, just leave me alone for a while. But we have those moments where we think negative thoughts or we think mean things about others, and if that person would just go away and I don't really care how it happens, right? We have those pieces of us. And so the challenge becomes, how do we live more into a character of resurrection rather than feeding that character of crucifixion? Because the transformation of the world is in the resurrection story, in our lives, in our character, and in others. So in the 1990, the mid-1990s, peace accords were signed between Mexico and Guatemala. And the Guatemalans who had been refugees in Mexico were finally allowed to go back to Guatemala. At the time that happened, a lay missioner by the name of Kathy McNeely went to Guatemala, and she said when she got there, just the sights were just devastating. So much destruction and so much poverty, and here people were trying to rebuild, and they had tarps over all kinds of things, trying to create spaces to be, and the men were chopping firewood, and the women were all lining up at the 2 newly dug wells to carry water for them to use. And everything was muddy because the spring rains had come. She said, but she sat down and she talked to some of those refugees who had come back. They had this life about them. So she talked to one of the leaders, his name was Eduardo. And as he sat and talked to her, despite the miserable conditions around them, he sat up tall. And he was excited and he was animated and he was hopeful as he talked about how they had come back from Mexico and how they had worked together to plan how to rebuild and how to plant and how to help each other get settled in their new old places. But then when they asked him about the story of why they had to leave Guatemala in the first place, he said his whole demeanor just changed. And he slumped in the chair and he looked down and his voice got quiet and he got near tears, because it had been when he was about 9 years old that forces had come into his little village and destroyed it, killed people, chased people out. He ran with his mother and his sister. They got to the woods in time to look back and hear the screaming and see the flames taking the village, and they lost family members and animals and possessions. It was truly a massacre, a crucifixion on a huge scale, if you will. And Eduardo could have lived the rest of his life with a character of crucifixion. That could have marred him in such a way that all he wanted was vengeance and retribution. That all he wanted to do was hurt other people because he'd been hurt. He could have been bitter, he could have been angry, he could have lived like that and lived out of that. And we all would have understood, probably. But he chose to live with a resurrection character. With one that had hope in the future, one that was willing to rebuild and to lift others up and to lead in that process. And how beautiful is that? You know, I can look around the room And I see so many resurrection stories here. Whether it was from an illness and surgeries, or death, or loss of jobs, or well, they were all right there when I was writing this sermon. Divorce, loss of family members. You can add to them if you want. What was that? Abuse, violence, natural disasters. So every one of you, I know, has a resurrection story. And I think most of you have chosen to live, not all of you, a resurrection life. Maybe it was hard for a while to get through, to work through, and maybe you still have things you need to work through. But gosh, you all have a resurrection spirit in you. I've seen it. I know it. And if we look around the world, it exists everywhere. With the natural disasters, we watch people coming together after fires and hurricanes and tornadoes and earthquakes and bombings and so many things. The resurrection character is alive and well if we can just stand firm against the Caesars and those with a crucifixion character. And sometimes it's hard, and sometimes the odds are stacked against us, and we do it anyways. We close with a story, an Aztec story coming out of Mexico. A long, long time ago, there was a great fire that threatened all the great forests in the world. And the animals and the people started to run to try and get away from this fire. And the owl was one of the ones who was running. And as the owl was running to get to safety, and I don't know why the story says running, but it does. In my head, the owl should be flying, but let me tell you. The owl sees a little tiny bird who's running to the river. Again, running. Why is the bird not flying? And getting water in its little teeny tiny mouth, and going back to the fire and dropping it on the fire. And going back and forth and back and forth. And owl comes up to the little bird, the Quetzal bird, and says, "What on earth are you doing? Are you stupid? You can't possibly have any effect on this fire." And the little Quetzal bird stops and looks at him and says, "I'm doing what I can with what I have." And the story goes that a long, long time ago, the great forests of the world were saved from a huge fire by a little Quetzal bird, an owl, and all of the people and animals who came together to put out the flames. Resurrection character. Jesus had it. The disciples had it. Eduardo had it. The little Quetzal bird had it. And it's catching when you put it out there. May we all live that resurrection character. Amen.